Shows involving timelines and rewriting time can either go horribly wrong or brilliantly unique. When it comes to the world of K-drama, 2020 has brought a bit of mixed bag for sci-fi. From the disappointing Alice to the excellent King, Eternal Monarch, Kairos is undoubtedly one of the most underrated dramas of the year. With a simple but effective hook, a smartly written script and some endearing, well-rounded characters, Kairos is ultimately the best show you've never heard of. The story takes place across two timelines separated by a single month. In September, businessman Seo Jin has everything he could ever want: trophy wife Hyun Chae, adorable daughter Da Bin, and a promising career thanks to Chairman Yu taking a shining to him. When his daughter goes missing, Seo Jin finds his world turned upside down as he starts a desperate search to find her. Only, the truth is far more disturbing and shocking than he could ever imagine. Lending him a hand in this search is Arai, a woman inexplicably separated by a month and able to communicate for 1 minute each day at 10:33 p.m. Only, it turns out she's living in August, a whole month before Seojin. To complicate matters further, Arai's mother goes missing, and the clues seem to point towards September holding the answers. As the mystery deepens, the second half of Kairos mixes things up with more urgency as the truth is revealed, and then injected with more suspense by a couple of well-worked twists along the way. In fact, these twists work perfectly across the season, and the few moments of Deus Ex Machina are easy to ignore, because of this unique plot mechanic. In fact, the 1-month separation seems to be linked through a strange building collapse in the past that haunts Seo Jin's memories. Without giving away too much, this does become more centralized to what's going on toward the latter periods of the show. To give much more away would be a disservice to this Korean gem, but suffice to say Kairos does a really good job with its storyline and remains gripping throughout. Part of this comes on account of the characters who are all well written and given some decent arcs throughout. Seo Jin's work colleague Do Kyun has a really good arc too, while the shadowy T Kyu grows into quite the formidable foe across the 16 episodes. While some of the supporting players are a bit cliched, they're acted perfectly by a talented cast to deliver a wholly satisfying experience. In fact, the few tropes and cliches that do show up are about the only recognizable element to most of the K-dramas out there. For the most part, Kairos plays out as a gritty, mature drama that tackles some pretty heavy themes along the way. It does so with an uncompromising story that grabs you by the scruff of the neck and refuses to let go. Kairos is one of the smarter written sci-fi series of the year, and it's a shame more people haven't heard of this one. Hopefully Netflix or Viki picks this up in the foreseeable future, because it really is an underrated gem. Well written, perfectly paced and tonally on point, Kairos is one drama you should definitely make time for. Let's begin the recap. Episode 1 of Kairos begins with a suitably intriguing opener to this thrilling Korean drama. Rain lashes down as a group of construction workers begin leaving their posts. Only, suddenly the foundations begin cracking, and the walls tremble. In the bathroom, Seo Jin breathes heavily as everything falls around him. Eventually he composes himself, given all of this was just an illusion presumably, and he begins walking around the construction site. Clearly, he's not happy with the delayed work thanks to the rain. He organizes the troops, and begins surveying the various buildings. While he does, a board meeting gets underway as the financial statement reports are looked over. Seo Jin arrives fashionably late, but immediately makes a big splash, managing to stand out for all the right reasons. His colleagues however are not happy, including director Park whom Seo Jin questions over his ties with Turkey. Seo Jin returns home after a busy day, and greets his daughter Da Bin, who guides him into her room. There, we're introduced to his wife Hyun Chae who happens to be a violinist. Da Bin takes a tumble in the morning, but thankfully Hyun Chae is there to help patch her up, complete with a cute pink sticker. A charity event starts and Da Bin arrives with her babysitter Hai Kyung. Hyun Chae is performing there and Da Bin has tagged along to see her mother live. Only, the young girl wanders off to pick up some sweet treats, but unfortunately smashes a glass on the way. Seo Jin is not happy, and clutches his daughter by the hand, leading her outside where he scolds her about smashing the glass. Eventually Da Bin gets to see Hyun Chae play but midway through, wanders off on her own to use the toilet. When Hai Kyung notices she's gone, the woman races off to try and find her. It's no good, Da Bin has disappeared. When Seo Jin finds out, he's consumed with panic and races off to try and find her. It's every parent's worst nightmare and the pair race to the police station in a bid to learn more. Seo Jin has enough, and pulls the chief outside to question exactly what's happening, after sensing a lack of urgency from the staff. He shouts at the detective, wondering just what they're doing, and why they're not moving faster to find Da Bin. Although more people will be dispatched to the case, it's not good enough for Seojin, who curses the heavens. Meanwhile, we're introduced to Han Arai, who works part-time at a convenience store. After helping with a delivery, she's bemused by the arrival of a small child clutching a teddy bear. Only this small child happens to be Da-bin, who asks for ice cream. When she fails to find any, she happily skips away from the shop. Arai is distracted by a call regarding her mother, who's finally found a heart donor. She thanks her friend Jean Wook and hurries up to the university hospital. Only, things take a turn for the worst when a Code Blue sees her mother rushed into surgery. Although the woman pulls through, it also means that her transplant will have to wait longer until she's back to full health. After leaving a voicemail for her father, Arai realizes she's misplaced her own phone and rushes outside with her mother's instead. Phoning it on repeat, she tries retracing her steps. For some reason, Seojin has her phone back at his place. Placed on top of a stack of missing person posters, he gets out the shower and calls the number back, unfortunately getting through to a voicemail. The next day, Seojin receives a call from someone claiming his daughter is safe. Whoever it is promises to be in touch shortly. This causes the police to work harder to try and track down exactly who contacted Seojin. A tangible clue to go on is enough for the police to clutch tightly to this thin sliver of hope. The police apprehend known child traffickers and wire up Seojin's house ready for a possible future call. The date is August 8, 2020, and Arai heads out with Jinwoo and Suying. There, she notices a call from my daughter, which appears to be Arai's phone. Only, when she rings it back, she gets through to Seojin's, who claims she's got the wrong number. The next number, however, most certainly is not. Whoever has taken Da-bin rings, and both parents plead for her to return home. After listening to this, whoever the person is agrees to bring Da-bin back tomorrow. The police turn their attention to Hai Kyung, but don't seem to get anywhere. Her alibi is tight for now. Instead, their attention turns to Seojin's workplace and his fellow colleagues, Teacher Ayu and Dukain. Both are questioned over whether they know anyone with a grudge against Seojin. Back home, the entire group are distracted by a knock at the door. A motorcyclist leaves a package and races off. The police follow in hot pursuit, while Seojin's earlier message gets through to Arai. Only, she obviously recognizes the child from her shop and texts, confirming as much. Printing out the missing person flyers, she begins putting these up around town too. Back with Seojin, he sits with the other detectives as they tentatively open the package. Inside is the girl's severed finger. The plaster is the same as Da-bin's, and both parents are beside themselves with grief. The DNA results come back from the finger, confirming it's a match too. This causes Hyun-chae to be admitted to hospital, where she eventually leaves and heads up to a bridge. She leaves a voicemail for Seojin, telling him she can't live without Da-bin. As we cut to her coat floating in the wind, it appears that she's jumped. Overcome with grief, Seojin starts sobbing when he heads to the bridge, but finds a text on his phone from Arai. She's confirmed to have seen Da-bin. Ringing the number, Arai picks up and asks to meet. Only, as we suddenly see a prison bus behind him passes carrying Arai as a passenger, a murderous look plasters across her face. Episode 2 of Kairos begins with Arai finishing her phone call with a bombshell reveal. It's actually August, not September, and he's got the dates wrong on the missing poster. As she hangs up, Seojin looks on in confusion, visibly confused at her words. Arai heads to the diner and sits by the window waiting for Seojin. As she does, Seojin shows up in the same booth, but obviously they're a month apart and aren't able to see one another. Eventually, Seojin gives up when he receives a call from Detective Park, telling him to go to the station. Once there, he learns that they weren't able to find the license plate for the bike, and they have very little to go on. Not long after, he heads to the kindergarten intending to try and cling to scraps of information that could help with Da-bin's disappearance. Specifically, he wants to check any photos or CCTV footage they have. Despite sifting through a stack of photos, he fails to get anywhere. Meanwhile, police show up at Yoon Hae Kyung's apartment with a search warrant. They're intent on trying to find if Da-bin is there. Although they don't find the girl, they do find a whole wardrobe full of clothes for a little girl. This is enough to bring the woman down to the station, but her alibi is solid. Arai leaves the diner too, but makes a point of putting her missing poster up again, changing the date to August. She heads to the hospital with her sister intending to visit Songja. Only, for some reason she's not there, and all of her stuff is gone. She's been discharged, and no one seems to have seen her in the local area. While Arai panics, looking around for her mother, she receives another message from Seojin. This message turns into a frantic call as they talk about the dates and why they didn't see each other. Eventually things turn heated and they both hang up. Not long after, Detective Park rings and confirms they have a suspect, the man who dropped off the package containing Dobbin's finger. He feigns ignorance, telling them he ran away because he was scared. While he's questioned, Seo-jin walks purposefully into the station and immediately up to the man, enraged and threatening to kill him. Only, it turns out the driver too has a solid alibi, so they're back to score one again. We then return to that scene with the falling rubble last episode. This time the whole ceiling collapses, and out the dust and concrete, a hand reaches out. Seo-jin awakens, breathing heavily, as he realizes this is all a dream, or is it? As he checks his voicemail, Seo-jin overhears the news report regarding the typhoon. Realizing he may be onto something, Seo-jin heads out and checks the bulletin board near the cafe. There, he finds the missing child poster Arai put up, including the date being changed. He then tries to get through to Arai, realizing that the dates may be the reason they aren't catching each other. That evening, thugs show up at Jin-wook's house. After breaking his door down, they start beating him with baseball bats. After knocking him down to a pulp, they berate him for ignoring their calls and remind the boy he owes them money. Meanwhile, Arai receives another call from Seo-jin, who immediately asks what the date is. Upon finding out she's in August, he asks for help in finding Dobbin. She's the only one who can save her. Unfortunately, Arai is having none of it and calls him a lunatic, hanging up. It seems like there's a 1-minute window where the two can communicate, which happens to be at 10:33. Intending to try and prove he's a month ahead, Seo-jin sends a whole stack of messages across with news headlines, including winning lottery numbers too. As it hits 10:33 again, the messages come through, but Arai ignores them and continues phoning her contacts to try and find her mum. Seo-jin's investigation eventually leads him to Arai's address, but she's obviously a month behind and not staying there anymore. Thanks to a slick camera shot, we see Arai leaving her house a month prior. While Seo-jin finds Arai's contact details, eventually phoning Soo-young, who claims not to know her, Arai receives a call from Jin-wook claiming to have a contact that can help find her mother. With cuts across his face, he phones his contact and tells Arai to stick around. Only, this is all a big scam to get Jin-wook out of trouble. $30,000 have been taken from her account and Jin-wook is nowhere to be found. Arai heads to the police station, but the officer there confirms the worst: there's no guarantee that she'll be able to get the money back. As she weeps outside, Arai glances over at the poster and finds a list of the lottery numbers matching the text message sent. As the time hits the familiar 10:33, she receives a whole stack of messages surrounding Jin-wook, her missing mother and stolen funds. He quickly rings and promises her that he'll do his best to find the money. Only, midway through talking, the call disconnects. Arai arrives at the jail brandishing a yellow tag, which means she killed someone. Silently, she sits in the corner and hangs her head until she receives a visitor, Arai. There, he admits that the flashes to the building collapse we've been seeing are actually glimpses of the past where he nearly died. Back home, Seo-jin rings and confirms to Arai that she's found Jin-wook. Before he hands over the information, he asks her to promise something. It turns out August 17th is when Arai meets Jin-wook and kills the man, explaining exactly why she is in jail. Lo and behold, Arai finds him, and the two run through the streets until they come to a dead end. Arai thinks twice about stabbing him though, remembering Seo-jin's words. She drops the knife to the ground as Jin-wook drops the rock in his hand and tells her he had no other choice. On the back of this, time seems to have suddenly rewritten as Seo-jin learns Arai's name isn't on the discharge list at the prison. Realizing he can probably save his family, this thin sliver of hope is enough for Seo-jin to hold on to. Back home, Seo-jin rings Arai and congratulates her for holding back. He sends her a text with the winning lottery numbers, a ploy to get back the money she's lost. It works too, and she comes in second place, winning $40,000. Realizing what he's saying is true, Seo-jin has worked out they only have 1 minute to talk. They need to meet up first, bringing her to his office building. Now that time seems to have changed, the police receive a visit at the station from a man with a strange limp. Looking on in shock, he screams at everyone, telling them he kidnapped Dobbin. Apparently Seo-jin killed his son, which is why we begin episode 3 of Kairos in September 2020 as Seo-jin receives a call just as he's about to post a letter. Reluctantly, he posts it through the letterbox before hurrying away. Down at the police station, the man claiming to have taken Dobbin is a divorcee known as Kim Jin-ho. As we quickly skip back to August, we see Jin-ho arrive at Eugene Construction. Seo-jin turns up too, prompting this man to claim their company is murderous. He shuffles forward, details surrounding his daughter plastered across a large placard. Arai happens to be there too, and sees the man escorted out the building. Arai finds the guy outside surrounded by security guards, prompting her to head out and try to help him. Dukain arrives and hands over his card, asking to talk about his situation. Instead, he turns and walks away, unwilling to speak to anyone other than a director or president. In September, Seo-jin receives the dreaded call from the police that they found their culprit. As he rushes to the station, Detective Park warns him that, if he can't keep his emotions in check then he'll be forced to leave. As he steps in the room, Seo-jin sees Jin-ho and immediately lunges at him. The police stop Seo-jin though, as Jin-ho remains calm and collected, telling him that Seo-jin killed his child. The heartbreaking truth here is that the construction company used illegal materials on their buildings. Those materials caught light and the subsequent fire caused serious complications for his child, inevitably killing them. Determined to try and stop this, Seo-jin vows to change the past, especially if all this happened 1 month ago. Like a man possessed, Seo-jin heads straight back to his office in a bid to find the dates correlating to the date Jin-ho appeared in the lobby. Breathing heavily, Dukain shows up and finds out Jin-ho was the one who took Da-bin. Only, he's not so sure this is the whole truth. Or he at least gives off that impression anyway. Still, he promises to look into this for Seo-jin and get the details he needs. Back in August, Arai heads home after her shift and gives Jin-wook the cold shoulder. Despite him trying to rustle up the money needed to pay back Arai, including putting his house on the market, he's having none of it and walks away. At 10:33 p.m., she receives a call from Seo-jin asking her to look into the killer. He's got details on the whereabouts for Jin-ho and sends pictures across which she obviously recognizes from that day at the office building. He's also looked at medical records for her mum, but thus far nothing seems to have come back as definitive. Seo-jin asks Arai to try and convince his earlier self to help, but she knows that's easier said than done, especially how difficult Seo-jin has been to contact. Jin-wook knows this too, and decides to try and get in Arai's good books. He heads out, and manages to get an ID to get her into Eugene Construction. He hands it over to her, before taking his leave. In September, Seo-jin's search brings him to Haikyeong whom he asks about Jin-ho and Da-bin's schedule. She doesn't recognize Jin-ho's picture either, but does mention Sky Cafe for Kids which is a place Da-bin used to frequent. Unfortunately the CCTV footage is deleted a week later. As Seo-jin looks set to leave, he bumps into a young girl who looks a little like Da-bin, and it brings back memories of the past. 10:33 p.m. rolls round again, and the duo discuss what they've been up to. Arai mentions the fake ID, and tries to work out exactly what to say to convince him. There's something I need to tell Da-bin, Seo-jin says, teary-eyed. As we cut to him clutching glow in the dark stars, a throwback to Da-bin's room in episode 1, he begins weeping. In August the big day arrives, but the fake ID doesn't work. Thankfully the security guard lets Arai in, and she rushes into the office, in order to tell Seo-kin that Da-bin is in trouble. It's enough to get inside, and she spills everything that she's learned from his future self. He listens carefully before sighing, believing she's a lunatic, until she tells him an important statement. It's not because of you. It wasn't because of you, Da-bin. This is enough to pique his interest as he stares wide-eyed at her. Unfortunately she's booted out the building not long after, with the plan a complete dud. In September, news breaks surrounding the illegal materials used at the construction site. The report also confirms what's been going on with Jin-ho too. As the police and prisoners watch this in separate areas, Jin-ho begins eating his bowl of food after previously starving himself. Elsewhere, Seo-jin starts going through his calendar, piecing together where Da-bin has been in the past month. However, fragments of this all past pierce through to the present, sending Seo-jin down to the ground. Dukain rings, and reveals what's been going on with the breaking news. Seo-jin promises to speak to the director himself and hangs up. Only, the director has been listening all this time, and is not happy. He visits Seo-jin in person, where the grieving father promises that the claims about illegal materials hold no weight. For now, he's allowed to keep his job. Jin-ho agrees to talk to the officers surrounding this leaking out on the news. He admits that he wanted Seo-jin's daughter to meet a painful fate like his did. As the detective asks just where Da-bin is, we cut across to a big police manhunt as they search for her among the thick bushes down by the river. A dog bark brings Detective Park rushing down to the water, where they find clothes and a teddy that matches Dobbin's. In August, Ari receives a call from the hospital surrounding her mother. The patient next to hers left a tape recorder, but while one of the nurses doesn't remember if Song-hwak received any visitors or not, another is more certain. She remembers a time where someone suspicious was standing outside a room. As Ari checks the CCTV footage, she notices someone walking with a limp. A limp that makes her realize Jin-ho was the one who visited her. On the back of this, Ari rings Seo-jin and reveals about Jin-ho visiting her mum. Seo-jin decides to meet Ari in his time to work out what's going on. This brings us back to September, where Seo-jin shows up and finds their place completely trashed and the front gate unlocked. He heads to the realtors, but they don't seem to have any clues over what's happening either. Seo-jin receives a call from Detective Park, who brings him into the station to identify Dobbin's clothes. When he shows up, Seo-jin learns that Jin-ho is going to be arrested for taking Dobbin, but also for killing Ari. It appears time has changed again, and Jin-ho kills Ari at his residence, the same residence she's intending to visit that very day. Oh no. Seo-jin scrambles to message her, pleading via text for her not to visit Jin-ho, but it's too late. Ari is dropped off at his address by a taxi, but we also see this same location a month later with Seo-jin showing up. As Ari heads inside, as the episode comes to an agonizing close, we begin episode 4 of Kairos with Jin-wook learning that Ari has left work, heading off on his mope to try and find her. Meanwhile, Seo-jin leaves a voicemail for Ari, warning her not to go inside the house, while a month earlier, Ari creeps through Jin-ho's front garden, unaware of what's going to happen to her. What ensues from here is a slick back and forth as Seo-jin begins investigating inside the house, while Ari meets and greets Jin-ho. It's a really well shot segment, one that confirms Jin-ho had a guest over that night. As Seo-jin looks over the room, everything changes before his very eyes, which seems to hint that the past has been changed. The catalyst for that change? Jin-wook. He grabs Ari's hand and takes her away before she can head inside Jin-ho's house. As they get to safety, Seo-jin, in September, phones the police and tries to learn more about the Ari case they were dealing with. Getting nowhere, he instead heads online, and there he sees that the murder has been pushed back by one day. For now, Ari survives long enough to receive some questions from Jin-wook asking what she's doing. Crucially, she left without her phone, which confirms the messages from Seo-jin about Jin-ho killing her. This actually prompted Jin-wook to check out the property. Demanding to know what's going on, Ari eventually spills all to Jin-wook, including how she believes he's involved with her mother's disappearance. In order to do that, Jin-wook repays his debt to her by following Jin-ho. In September, Seo-jin heads inside the police station intending to find details surrounding the case. Detective Park isn't there, but the other officers are apathetic enough to let him work undisturbed. While he does, Ari leaves a voicemail for him confirming she too has been through tough times in the past. In the morning, Seo-jin heads back to the police station and speaks plainly to Jin-ho. He apologizes for what happened in the past, and now understands how he feels. Throwing a curveball, he then turns the questioning to Ari, but claims that he didn't kill her. Could it be that time has changed again? Or is he lying? As our two protagonists start communicating bit by bit over time, they both try to work out if Jin-ho is really involved in killing Ari or not. From the looks of it, it doesn't look like he was. However, before he can continue on, the prosecution suddenly burst into his apartment and start sifting through all of Seo-jin's belongings, even going so far as to redirect Seo-jin's calls to Eugene Construction. A civic group has filed a complaint, and the illegal materials mentioned before appear to fall directly on Seo-jin's lap. Seo-jin is understandably agitated, and even more so given his phone is in for digital forensics, so Ari can't reach him. Back in August, Ari returns to visit Seo-jin. He once again mentions the story about Da-bin being kidnapped, but he refuses to listen, calling it all nonsense. She pleads with him to meet Jin-ho, but, straight-faced, Seo-jin ignores her completely and walks away. Meanwhile, Ari heads out to a restaurant with Do-kyun where she repeats the same message once more, this time asking for his help. Eventually he agrees to do just that, taking her number and agreeing to ring if anything comes up. Ari's pleas seem to work slightly, as Seo-jin in September feels excruciating pain in his head, as past glimmers appear to change the timeline slightly. After the incident with Ari in August, Seo-jin head back to the office again, and asks to run additional tests on the illegal materials used with the constructions. With the interviews going on long into the night, Seo-jin worries that he'll miss the crucial time frame to speak to Arai and guide her in her investigation. The rest of Eugene Construction catch wind of what's happening, with Dukayan feeding back what's happening to the director. The latter tells him that they're Seo-jin's only friends and people they trust. Back in August, Arai tails Hyun-chae as she leaves her house with SEO-0 and heads to a room in a motel complex. There, she warmly embraces another man and heads inside. That man, none other than Dukayan himself. Just before Arai knocks on the door, she receives another message, and this time it confirms she'll be killed at apartment 609, the exact place she happens to be standing. Unfortunately, Dukayan disrupts the call from Arai and hangs up on her, much to Seo-jin's disgust. As the pair stare one another down, in the past Chun-hyun and Dukayan start kissing, leaving the door wide open for. We begin episode 5 of Kairos in August 2008 with Hyun-chae turning up at a restaurant with her violin. After her meeting, Dukayan kindly gives her an umbrella and watches her play from behind the bar. As he keeps watching, a drunk patron tries to pay her off before touching her instrument. Eventually Dukayan interjects, but because of this, winds up getting her fired. She decides to stay at his place that evening and asks him to get her coffee in the morning. He hurries out and comes back with 2 trays full, stunned when he sees her blow-drying her hair. As she spies him, Hyun-chae smiles and tells him she couldn't find any other clothes. Even this early, you can see the seeds of seduction and manipulation being sown here. This catches us up to where we left off last episode, as Arai shows up at the motel, while Dukayan and Hyun-chae are getting intimate. Arai wisely thinks twice about staying and heads home. As our cheating pair do the same, Hyun-chae and Dukayan both take it in turns to answer Seo-jin's calls, although it's clear that Hyun-chae is not happy. She turns up the music in his car, and the faint glimmer of classical music spills over to Seo-jin's future, rewriting what's happened. In September, Dukayan confronts Seo-jin over the illegal materials being used as Eugene Construction. Both of them go blow to blow, with Seo-jin believing he's to blame. Suddenly though, ripples of the past bleed through and files from Korea testing laboratory materialize at the police station. This bit of Deus Ex Machina gets Seo-jin off the hook, and he's allowed to go. On the way out, Dukayan follows and tells him he's thankful his boss is okay. Dukayan tentatively apologizes, just as Seo-jin vows to investigate this further and figure out exactly who's to blame. In his car, he rings the detective and learns that Arai has survived too. With manager Seo working outside the office, Seo-jin purposefully marches into the office. He's determined to investigate this further until the chairman rings and tells him to come into his office. The chairman tells Seo-jin to lay low for the time being, especially with the heat on him. Seo-jin refuses to take this lying down, though, and remains determined to try and fight this. Eventually realizing arguing is in vain, Seo-jin heads home. He's driven back by Tae-kyu, but flashes from the past, specifically revolving around his scar, showed that he was the one following Arai that night. As Seo-jin heads back in his apartment, he deliberates over everything he's learned so far. Back in August, Arai remains determined to get to the bottom of what's happening and finding her mother. She heads straight for the hospital and speaks to Jin-ho. He asks just why he showed up in Song-ja's room and what their connection is. Only, that connection is not with her mother, but actually her father. Jin-ho claims that he's just as much to blame as the construction company. After mentioning Taejing Town, he limps away without revealing too much more. As we cut across to Song-ja, we see her using a payphone. She promises to disappear, but implores them to keep Arai out of this. When she hangs up, Song-ja vows retribution if they lay a finger on her daughter. Who could be on the while Tae-kyu starts investigating who Arai is and her connections to this case, Arai gets on a bus heading for Taejing Town, determined to do some investigating of her own. It's been 19 years since she was in her childhood home, and as we see from flashbacks, an accident surrounding the construction company is what started her mother's heart problems. She was devastated and has never been the same since. Arai heads to the memorial park, where flowers are still up in memory of those lives lost. It turns out, all of this is surrounding a collapsed building, and Tae-gil was one of those victims caught in the collapse. This seems to point back to the opening scene of the first episode. Banyang and Eugene Construction signed a co-contract here. Could it be that the illegal materials were used, and that's why it collapsed? As the camera pans down the wall, it's worth mentioning that among the dead, 3 people went missing. This number 3, as you may remember, is also symbolic for our current time period, given Da Bin, Hyun-chae and Song-ja have all gone missing. While this is debunked later on by a bit plot twist, it's worth pointing out nonetheless. In September, Seo-jin arrives at Unit 609, but finds no one home. He does manage to uncover the phone number for the occupant, and it's here he realizes it's Tikayu. In August, Arai also finds the registration number, and sends that along with the CCTV footage to Seo-jin. Their 1-minute phone call takes place as scheduled, with messages and videos shared. Seo-jin checks out the video of Tikayu, while Arai learns that the man is Seo-jin's assistant at work. Arai even goes on to reveal the building collapse 19 years ago, and how Yujin were connected in that tragedy. Before they can discuss more, the 1-minute window runs out. And now we cut back 19 years ago, and see the moment this building collapsed. The massive skyscraper topples, with the entire building crumbling to the ground. It's a shocking moment and one that's just as visually stunning, as clouds of dust cough and sputter into the air. In September, Seo-jin tries to rattle Tikayu, telling him he wants to see Jin-ho. Only, when he gets there he makes Tikayu go in alone, and plants a bug under his car to keep tabs on where he's going. When Tikayu leaves, oblivious that he's being tracked, Seo-jin heads inside and tries to get answers from Jin-ho. He remains stoic in the wake of these questions, failing to disclose what his agreement with Tikayu is. Instead, Seo-jin is forced to rely on Tikayu's car for any possible suspicions. As he does, news breaks online about how Seo-jin is cleared of any wrongdoing with the illegal materials. Tikayu sees this too, realizing that Arai is connected in some way but unable to piece together exactly how for now. Tikayu has plenty of time to think this over, heading up to a big house, where both Da-bin and Hyun-cha happen to be alive and well. It seems like all of this is a ploy, to get back at Seo-jin. But why? For what end goal? Seo-jin tracks Tikayu's car out on the expressway, and heads out to try and track him down. Parking up at the last known location for him, Seo-jin starts looking around, until he finds Song-ja strung up, and hanging by the rafters in an abandoned house nearby. As he sees this, we cut back in time with Song-ja apologizing to Jin-ho for not being more helpful. Watching him leave, Tikayu shows up in the adjacent elevator, and asks if they can. Episode 6 of Kairos begins with the shocking discovery of Song-ja's hanging body. Just then, Seo-jin receives a call from Arai who tells him to check his messages. Tikayu is the one responsible for this, it seems, and Seo-jin tells her he's been tailing him, and found a dead body in an abandoned house. Unfortunately their minute is up, and they're forced to abandon this call for now. Just before he leaves, Seo-jin finds a letter in Song-ja's pocket. Taking it with him, he heads up to a public phone box and calls the police, to let them know about the dead body. Only, someone happens to be watching from afar when he does. Out on the road, Seo-jin starts heading home, but follows the bug he planted on Tikayu's car to a bus station. Tikayu is wise to this, though, and phones Do-kain to let him know. He reassures the man who, telling him he took the bug off before he could be tracked further. Seo-jin heads home and checks out the folded letter he uncovered. It seems to have a bank account number attached and the word Haishin. On the back of this, he phones Jun Seop, who happens to be at the bank, and asks for help tracking down the account number. He agrees to help, and after hanging up, Seo-jin starts looking through the files of Yujin. There, he realizes that Tikayu and Do-kain actually knew each other, before they started working at Yujin together. After a bad dream, Seo-jin receives a call confirming he's got lunch with Chairman Yu. Just before he leaves, Seo-jin tries desperately to find older documents from 2001 given the digital files only go up to 2005. Seo-jin arrives to see the chairman, where Do-kain happens to be too. He stares daggers through the man, but remains civil for the time being. Given what he's been through, the chairman gives Seo-jin the upcoming project that could decide the fate of the company. Afterward, his frostiness continues as he confronts Do-kain about his relations with Tikayu. The bank account numbers come back, and it turns out the number is actually from Song-ja, whom he confirms Tikayu has killed. As he curses his luck, Seo-jin realizes his one hope comes from Arai. Meanwhile, Da-bin wants to head home, but Hyun-chae simply tells her to go to bed. Afterward, Hyun-chae talks to Do-kain and hugs him tightly, telling him she wants to leave the country. Back in August, Arai catches up with Da-bin at an indoor soft play and starts spending time with her. Only, Hyun-chae collects a series of incriminating photos to hold against her. As she looks through these later in the day, Do-kain returns and confirms his plan, including using DNA that matches Da-bin's to fool everyone into believing she's dead. And now we cut back in time and see more of the past. Namely, we see Hyen Che, and how much of an absolute psychopath she is. With her alcoholic father trapped inside the house, as a child she lights it on fire and watches as he burns. She eventually walks away, setting up a, presumably, lifelong series of craziness. Still in August, Arai continues to work at the convenience store, while Hyen Che watches her in her car. The earlier bank account incident is elaborated on further, as Song Ja receives $100,000 in her account. She tells her sister and immediately they suspect the worst. Back in September, or forwards, Seo-jin goes hunting for Song Ja, eventually heading up to her local hangout spots to try and find any clues that may lead to her whereabouts. Getting nowhere, the night draws in and the pair manage to communicate again. Seo-jin confirms he was there when Taejin collapsed all those years ago and one of the survivors. If you remember, there's also 2 other survivors too. He also agrees to help with the account number. While Jin-ho lies in prison, he thinks back to moments from August, where Do-kyun arrived and saw firsthand that Jae-ah was suffering badly. While Jin-ho is out the room, he looks at the medicine for both kids. A heartless Do-kyun looks over the files and notices that the kids have the same issue, lupus. He even goes on to challenge Jin-ho and ask exactly how he's going to prove that they used illegal materials. As Jin-ho vows to kill them all, Do-kyun tells him to channel that anger at someone else. Someone like Seo-jin perhaps. Realizing he may have been played, Jin-ho sits up in prison and phones Seo-jin in the morning and asks him to come and meet him. Before that though, Seo-jin continues to look into Song Ja's whereabouts and stumbles upon a breakthrough. It turns out she was staying at a nearby market on September 14th. As the evening draws on, our phone calls return. Arai confirms that it was Taek Ja-yu who originally transferred money to Song Ja. In exchange, Seo-jin tells Arai she needs to find Song Ja before September 26 by any means necessary. Realizing what this means, Arai questions whose dead body he found. For now, he goes through the exact address, where her mother was on the 14th and the call ends. Song Ja phones Soo-young from a restricted number and now we see that she was on the other end of the line during her call from the phone box. She confirms that she's going to transfer the money to Arai, and apparently received that on the basis of never seeing her daughter again. She apologizes for burdening the pair and hangs up. Arai, however, happens to be on the roof and heard everything. In the morning, she shows Gun-wook the address, and he decides to tag along and head up to Ilju too. They're not alone, though Soo-young joins, despite suffering from travel sickness. In September, Jin-ho is left alone without any guards as Do-kyun shows up. When the guards return, they find him gone. Honestly, how stupid are these officers? Anyway, Jin-ho, as we soon see, is murdered and thrown off the roof. It's clear he has crucial intel, and now there's no way of getting that. Seo-jin receives a call from the detectives who confirm Jin-ho's death. They're convinced it was suicide as they even have a note to confirm that too. Seo-jin thanks them for calling, before receiving a call from the restaurant owner confirming he remembers Song Ja getting on a bus across town. As the plot thickens, a detective feeds back to Detective Park that Song Ja's autopsy brought back some alarming facts. This wasn't a suicide and even worse, a tie pin in her mouth has the name Seo-jin. He's being made out to be the culprit of this crime. The fact he phoned the police too doesn't paint him in a particularly favorable light. The detectives learn that too, with his phone pinned to that very location. Now he really does look guilty. Seo-jin continues to investigate Song Ja's whereabouts, finding the place she stayed a month ago. After falling asleep, Park Ringing wakes him up as he learns Taek Ja-yu and Do-kyun have framed him for the murder. Now it's serious, and with Seo-jin unwilling to hand himself over to the police, they head to the hotel instead, and have the place surrounded. Eventually Seo-jin is captured, and looks set to spend a lengthy spell in the police station. Back in August, our trio arrive at the diner, but after a fruitless search, eventually stumble into Song Ja just walking down the road. As Arai hurries over and embraces her mother, the future changes and all the officers after Seo-jin disappear. Time has changed again, thanks to Seo-jin's interference. But how much has it? We begin episode 7 of Kairos with Song Ja running into her daughter. This reunion rewrites time as we've seen before, and in August Arai takes her mother home. She holds her hand and promises to be there for her. In September, Seo-jin heads to the police station and asks about Jin-ho and Song Ja. The latter definitely hasn't been a missing person case there, but Jin-ho has still fallen to his death and they've chalked this up to a suicide. Seo-jin leaves the station and checks his phone, where a location tracker pings for Yujing Building. Suddenly, he realizes that the tracker is still attached to Tikai's car. That evening, Seo-jin reveals all on the phone to Arai, and finds out that Sung-ja is still safe. He also reveals about Jin-ho's suicide, and quizzes Arai about her mother's involvement with the construction site. As Arai tells him to catch Tikai, the call ends. In the morning, August, Arai asks her mother outright about what happened. It turns out she got her hands on a sizable amount of cash after selling her husband's lot of land in the countryside. Of course, that money brought the attention of less desirable people and she had to make sure he wasn't found out. Only, this doesn't explain Jin-ho. It turns out he knew Song-ja's husband had passed away, and he visited her afterwards. He wanted help with the Eugene construction gig. When Arai turns her attention to Tikayu, however, she's completely rattled and claims that's the name of the person who bought the land. Something doesn't add up here. Sung-ja and Arai visit their father at the destroyed building, but she struggles to compose herself. As Arai heads off to buy some flowers, when she returns she finds her mother gone, and a note pleading with her not to come and find her again. Meanwhile, Hyun-chae and Do-kyun put their plan in place, including leaving Da-bin with Jin-ho. As we cut across to the bridge, that same bridge on the fateful night Hyun-chae disappeared, she works with Do-kyun to stage everything. With the plan coming together, including getting Jin-ho involved in all this, they kiss out in the open as a train passes. After buying herself a taser, Arai tails Tikayu through the various streets until she's suddenly grabbed by Gun-wook, who stops her from going after him. Eventually she comes around to his way of thinking, and asks for his help. He refuses to do so, though, until she tells him more. Back home, Arai shows off the messages from Seo-jin to her sister and Gun-wook. Eventually she goes on and mentions how she's been communicating with him in the future. On the back of this, Gun-wook teams up with her and agrees to help find and kill Tikayu. During the 10:34 phone call, the pair realize that all of this stems from Da-bin's abduction. Arai decides to set out and try and stop it from occurring. First port of call, though, is bringing a new teddy to Da-bin, which seems to rewrite history again. The reason? She put a location tracker in the stuffed toy, and that could help track down Da-bin. In September, Seo-jin heads to the hospital to see for himself what happened on the rooftop. Given Jin-ho had a limp and was cuffed, Seo-jin is not so sure this adds up to him jumping to his doom. Even worse, the tracker on his phone points at it being Tikayu responsible, especially given he was there at the same time. Seo-jin uses the tracker to continue following Tikayu while Do-kyun and Tikayu come to blows. Tikayu demands his money, but Do-kyun simply tells him to stick to the contract, or he won't be getting anything at all. As they head out into the parking lot together, Seo-jin sees Do-kyun and Tikayu liaising and getting into separate cars. As they leave, he decides to follow from afar. Only, he carelessly misses his turning on the highway and curses his luck. Thankfully he manages to phone Arai, and she mentions the tracker with the teddy. Well, it turns out the service is unavailable, and for some reason, it doesn't seem to be working. Now it's worth mentioning that we've gone ahead a month, so from now on Arai is in September. Why is this significant? Well, September 6th is obviously the night of the recital, and it looks like Arai is on course to rewrite history. On September 1st, Hyun-chae looks outside and notices a strange scarred man approaching Seo-jin. Only, she quickly messages and asks to meet first, stopping him going after Seo-jin. Is she being blackmailed? It seems that way, and looking at the burns, this could actually be Hyun-chae's father. Anyway, before we find out for certain, we cut to 2nd October as Seo-jin heads back to work following the death of Jin-ho. It's this date where Tikayu spots the tracker under his car and removes it. Realizing this could spell trouble, he feeds it back to Do-kyun and vows to take care of Director Kim. Before that though, Seo-jin continues to look into the various files regarding Do-kyun and Tikayu. He realizes they both visited the same high school and brings Do-kyun in for questioning. Specifically, he asks about Jin-ho's murder. He feigns ignorance though, saying he doesn't know anything. After some tense moments, he eventually dismisses his work colleague. Back in September, Hyun-chae arrives at Arai's convenience store and outright mentions Da-bin and her connection to this case. She tells her to stay out of this business until she mentions Da-bin's disappearance. Arai knows what's going to happen and tells her to phone the police. What she doesn't know, however, is that Hyun-chae is directly responsible for the disappearance. When she leaves, Gun-wook brings back the ID tracker and a brand new login. Well, it's working now. They know it's not going to work after Da-bin's disappearance, so they need to move quickly. Well, that quick movement begins with phoning Seo-jin at 10:33, and giving him the new details. This time though, he finds the tracker works and points at a place called Villa de Ford. Even though the teddy doesn't have a tracker inside, given it's in the police station, something happened that points toward this secluded location. Seo-jin is desperate to find out what and hurries there, driving through the night. When he gets there, it turns out to be a crowded place full of people. Zooming in on the app, he eventually heads up further to a villa, where Da-bin happens to be playing outside. He also finds Hyun-chae too, and sees Dookin with his wife. With a murderous intent, he walks toward them, until Tikayu smacks him in the back of the head with a lead pipe. With the recital coming up, Gunwook and Arai work together, to do everything they can to prevent the kidnapping, that night at the recital. They have everyone in place and now it's up to our characters, to follow this through and hope for the best. We begin episode 8 of Kairos at the secluded villa with Hyun-chae and Dookin, wondering how to deal with their problem. Seo-jin awakens bloodstained and heartbroken as he realizes his entire world is coming crashing down. At the start of September, Hyun-chae runs into an old classmate who reveals she dropped out of class. That's obviously news to him though, as Seo-jin didn't know. When he stumbles home drunk later that evening, he asks her outright about her father and business. Hyun-chae tells him everything wasn't a complete lie, but their marriage most certainly was built on a whole stack of them. Meanwhile, Arai struggles to get through to Seo-jin, whose phone is switched off. Back in October, Dookin remains concerned and wants to take Seo-jin to the hospital, given he's continuing to bleed through. Hyun-chae meanwhile doesn't want the uncertainty hanging over them. That uncertainty, of course, has been carefully constructed by Hyun-chae, who, as we see from flashbacks, has been counting down the hours until she can drop the facade of playing a distraught mother mourning for her daughter. Arai is not ready to give up just yet though, as Gunwook decides to decipher the text messages sent between the two phones and figure out when everything started to go wrong. We're up to September 5th now, and there's less than 48 hours until Da-bin is captured. Time is very much against these guys. While Gunwook pieces together a timestamp of when the messages were sent and from where, Arai puts up missing person posters again while scouting out the venue from afar. Eventually the big day arrives, and Soo-young happens to be posing as hired help inside the venue. Gunwook meanwhile is tailing Jin-ho, sensing he's the one responsible. Finally, Arai keeps a close watch on Da-bin. The infamous smashed glass incident occurs just as before, and Seo-jin berates his daughter out in the lobby. While he does, Dookin and Tikayu move into position. The violin performance begins and Jin-ho shows up at the building. Gunwook follows from afar as he watches the man enter a stairwell. Da-bin leaves the recital and heads off, but she's stopped by Dookin, who distracts her long enough for Da-bin to leave her line of sight. She scrambles downstairs, struggling to find Da-bin, but drops her earpiece on the escalator along the way. Because of this, she doesn't hear Gunwook mention Jin-ho arriving on the third floor. He walks past Tikayu, who receives a message from Dookin, confirming that Arai has shown up. Arai, however, is hot on the heels of Da-bin, and rushes up to Seo-jin's daughter, managing to save her just as Jin-ho looks set to make his move. Suddenly, time changes and just like that, everything in October fades away too. Seo-jin's life is saved, but Arai is taken and arrested by police for taking Da-bin. They believe she's the one who intended to kidnap her after all. Even worse, the missing person poster she left on Seo-jin's door earlier that day doesn't look good either. The police find the messages on Arai's phone, but that number has only been active for a day. They believe Arai staged all the messages herself, and things certainly do not look good for her. Some things don't change, though, and Tikayu decides to go after Jin-ho and stop him. Dookin, however, believes they should be focusing on Arai instead. She's in serious trouble too, especially given she's going to be locked up for this. Everything now seems to fall on Gunwook, who decides to try and phone Seo-jin during the scheduled time of 10:33. It's no good, though, and right now the future is under jeopardy and unknown, especially after Da-bin rocking up absolutely fine. Seo-jin shows up at the police station and speaks to Arai, is desperate to try and save her own skin. However, she's also desperate to find Song-ja too. When Seo-jin sees the text messages they sent one another, he scoffs at the notion and tells her she disgusts him. He tells the police to properly make her pay for everything and walks away. When Seo-jin leaves, fragments of the parallel future, where Da-bin was kidnapped, come back to him, especially upon seeing Detective Park and walking in the main atrium at work. Could this be him getting his memories back from what happened in the future? Now that time is overlapping, it seems to be the case. Anyway, Gunwook and Soo-young head inside the prison and speak to Arai, convincing her to stay strong as they're going to get a lawyer involved. Watching on the news, Song-ja notices that her daughter has been taken in for questioning and hurries out from the shop she's working in. However, Soo-young receives a call from Song-ja where she learns that Arai is in serious trouble. Meanwhile, Hyun-chae and Do-kyun continue to hang out, with the latter promising to put their plan into place sooner rather than later. Hyun-chae receives a call later that day from the burned man who's presumably her father. She promises to kill him, but he's got enough dirt on her to ruin her life. Hyun-chae rings Seo-jin soon after, and tells him to pick up Da-bin on the way home. Only, when he steps outside for a second, Da-bin has completely gone from her seat at the table. It's deja vu all over again as a single tracking shot sees Seo-jin fade in and out of shot as he desperately tries to find his daughter. This series of actions, of course, bring back more flashes from the past. Thankfully, he finds her, and it turns out she was just by the water fountain. Arai manages to get hold of a phone courtesy of one of the officers showing some kindness. Unfortunately, when she rings Seo-jin, she fails to connect, and she breaks down crying. As she curses the heavens and screams down the phone receiver, the officer restrains her and takes the phone back. Meanwhile, Do-kyun visits Jin-ho and tells him the plan has been delayed for now. He mentions Song-ja, and it turns out T-kai didn't actually tell him about this. As we soon see, these two aren't exactly on the same page. Seo-jin agrees to visit Gun-wook, who tries his best to convince him to see reason. He's having none of it, though, and refuses to listen. On his way out the door, he receives a call from the chairman telling him he should get started on the Teaching Newtown project. This, of course, happens to have a lot of meaning for him given he survived the previous incident at Teaching. Later that night, Seo-jin drops the charges at 10:33 p.m. and phones Arai just as she leaves the police station. She vows it'll be the last call they have together, but suddenly she stops in her tracks. Choking and struggling to breathe, a blood-stained Seo-jin pleads with her for help. As the camera pans out, we see that both Da-bin and Hyun-chae are in the car too, and it looks like a car accident. What on earth happened? We begin episode 9 of Kairos with Seo-jin talking to the director about the incident at the concert. He tells Seo-jin to let Arai go and focus on the project at hand, so there's no distractions. When she leaves the police station, Arai of course receives that infamous call from Seo-jin in the car accident. Meanwhile, Do-kyun begins looking through the text messages sent between Seo-jin and Arai. Within that, he sees evidence linking back to his time with Hyun-chae at the apartment and starts to get worried. Do-kyun messages her too, telling Hyun-chae that he's got the texts in his possession. With this knowledge, Hyun-chae finds pills in Seo-jin's jacket and questions him over it. He's stone-faced though, and refuses to give anything up. Instead, she heads to the pharmacy in a bid to find out what the pills are. Time continues to overlap, as moments involving Do-kyun promising to be a good assistant bleed through Seo-jin's mind while he's talking to him regarding the materials from the apartment building. The conversation soon turns to Arai though, and in particular Seo-jin letting her go from the police station. Now that he knows about their messages, Do-kyun remains suspicious and speaks to Hyun-chae about it. She simply tells him to get rid of Arai and dispose of her. As we cut forward to the 10th October, Seo-jin recovers in hospital while detectives arrive at the scene of the car accident to figure out what happened. With no CCTV to go on, they check the tire tracks across the road and learn that these belong to a different vehicle that's Seo-jin's. In order to piece everything together, Park Ho-young decides to try and get an ADR report, event data recorder. When he asks where the wife and daughter are, we cut across to the coroner's office where Hyun-chae happens to be dead. On the 9th September, we jump back to see Jin-ho heading in to see his daughter at hospital. There, he's confronted by Song-ja who talks to him about Jae-ah's surgery. She hands over an envelope of money and tells him to pay for her care with it in exchange for a favor of her own. Elsewhere, Hyun-chae searches Da-bin's teddy for the tracker. Searching through the fluff, she eventually finds it and starts to realize what's happened. Not long after, she receives a message from the pharmacy confirming that the pills were actually sertraline, which is used to treat PTSD. Arai continues to try and find a way to track down Song-ja, contemplating whether the future holds the key, while Seo-jin begins to lose control, seeing flashes from the all-future he prevented. Hyun-chae knows what's up though, and she watches him have this panic attack. On the back of this, when Seo-jin leaves, she begins rooting around his office for clues linking to the past, including the prescription. When Seo-jin returns home, Hyun-chae walks out of his office and lies, telling him she was looking for something. Seo-jin heads to the doctors and explains about the frightening images he's been seeing and how conflicted this is making him feel. Just before he leaves, the doctor tells him that missing a treatment could hurt his recovery. Hyein-chae meets back up with Do-kyun, who remains worried and concerned over what happened with T-Kyu. It's obvious that things are starting to unravel here, but Hyein-chae remains quiet while she thinks up her next move. Director Yu talks to Seo-jin about the upcoming project, explaining that Song-ja visited him during the recent collapse. He vows to do his best to honor the memories of those fallen. After this conversation, Seo-jin decides to head in and visit the hospital and see Jae-ah. Only, there he runs into Jin-ho. He claims to be happy to listen, but Jin-ho is enraged that it's taken him this long to say anything. As they talk, Seo-jin remains calm and admits that he was a victim from the Tijing building collapse. On the back of this, he promises to help any way he can with Jin-ho and his daughter. After their conversation, Jin-ho rings T-Kyu and Do-kyun, bailing on them and deciding that he's not going to abandon his daughter. The fateful time of 10:34 arrives, but Arai struggles to get through to Seo-jin given he's in a critical condition. As we cut forward to the 11th October, Do-kyun is called into the police station for a statement. It turns out Seo-jin had drugs in his system, the sertraline to be precise, and it looks like he took that before the accident. But why? Or is it the case that Hyein-chae drugged him? The plot thickens. Back on the 11th September, Arai hands out flyers with Soo-young relating to her mother's disappearance, while T-Kyu finds out that Jae-ah has been discharged from hospital. Hyein-chae meets him not long after, though, and senses that he's hiding something from Do-kyun. She promises to keep his secret from Do-kyun, and, knowing he's motivated by money, will pay him to find out what it is. Arai receives a call from her mother later that evening asking if she's okay and out of hospital. Song-ja tells her she'll soon be able to return and mentions how it's almost over now. As she starts coughing down the phone, Arai asks if she's sick. As we cut across to Song-ja, we see her clutching her chest, wandering down the road and struggling to breathe. Without much of a choice, Arai decides to contact T-Kyu and meet with him. She needs to find her mother before something bad happens. That sees Arai head to a meeting the company are holding regarding the new Tijing Town project. The people there are not happy, but Seo-jin goes out of his way to quell their doubts. He opens up in front of this big crowd and admits that he survived the previous accident and explains how his father committed suicide. He vows to do everything he possibly can to make this a success and build the strongest foundations possible for the future. After the meeting, Hyein-chae's father confronts his daughter in the bathroom and promises to get revenge. Out in the lobby, Do-kyun confronts Arai about her showing up, but Arai bites back, mentioning how he should stop stabbing Seo-jin in the back. This, of course, is a direct reference to the affair he's been having. Cutting forward to the 13th October, Do-kyun heads in to see Seo-jin, asking just why he's the only survivor. He thinks twice about turning off Seo-jin's oxygen though and instead, reaches for Seo-jin's phone. With this in hand, he suddenly receives a call from Do-kyun. As the two talk, Do-kyun from the past grabs the phone, and the two iterations interact with each other, prompting our October version to jerk back and collapse on the ground, with time rewritten slightly again. He quickly hangs up the phone as he realizes his past self was on the. We begin episode 10 of Kairos with Do-kyun heading out in search for Arai, finding the missing person posters for Song-ja, before accidentally speaking to himself from the future timeline. In September, Do-kyun rings Seo-jin from his phone where he hears firsthand the genuine confusion about speaking to Arai. As the pair talk, he asks outright exactly why T-Kyu is looking for Song-ja. As he shouts at Arai, Soo-young arrives and manages to stop this from escalating. Seo-jin meanwhile briefs the board about the new project and introduces Do-kyun as the team manager. Director Yu tells him to stay alert, but Do-kyun is clearly dumbfounded that he's been given a promotion. Arai receives a call later that day from someone representing the Tijing Town Collapse Victims Association. At the same time, Do-kyun and Seo-jin head there too to try and quell their doubts about the new town being built. When he gets there, Seo-jin checks the wall and notices pictures of his father among other workers. Still, they get to the crux of the issue, and this man is not happy that the project wasn't investigated properly originally. He claims Chairman Yu is covering things up and tells Seo-jin never to return again. Just before he goes, Seo-jin learns more about his father, including news that he was an honorable man and would never have left him, Seo-jin, to his fate. He was determined to get to the bottom of what happened and search for the truth. This may well have got him killed by Yu and the other chairman. Unbeknownst to him, Dukayan happens to be listening from the door. On the 13th October, Dukayan looks through the text messages and notices the times are similar. Now he's starting to understand that he's speaking from the future and finally figures out what's going on. Believing he can bring Hyun-chae back to life, he promises to do so no matter the cost. A day later, 14th October, Dukayan is still grieving and eventually picks up the phone to Detective Lee. They found the car involved in the accident. He rushes up to check and finds a truck under a tunnel. This was stolen by someone a few days before, but with no fingerprints or DNA to go on, it's tough to know who it was. However, one of the clues happens to be a lighter for a motel nearby. Dukayan sees this and races off to check. As we cut back to the 13th September, we see Hyun-chae and Tae-kyu together. The former managed to find the perfect place for this accident to take place, and she's decided to use the pills to make Seo-jin fall asleep, leaving the car quickly on this stretch of road, and allowing Seo-jin to be killed off once and for all. Arai arrives for her scheduled meeting not long after with the victim committee. There, he reveals that their fathers were close, along with Seo-jin's too. His words about Chairman Yu earlier in the episode seem to hold weight, as Dukayan racks his brain around exactly where he's seen Song-ja before. Then it clicks. After his meeting with Yu about hurrying through the paperwork with the project, Song-ja passed him and head in for a private meeting. What were they talking about, I wonder? Dukayan receives a call from Hyun-chae, and he feeds back what he's found out. He's going to plan again for them to leave and asks her for some more time to get things together. On October 14th, Dukayan heads in to check the motel in a bid to try and find Tae-kyu. Eventually he does so, blooding his face by smashing it through a glass table and holding Tae-kyu up by his throat outside. Suddenly though, Tae-kyu reveals that Hyun-chae put him up to this, and reveals the truth about the entire plan with the truck and trying to kill Seo-jin. Dukayan's initially hesitant to believe him, but when he does, he decides to try and rewrite time and contact the past to change things. He sends a message to Arai's phone telling her that Tae-kyu is responsible and he needs to be back. On the 13th September, Seo-jin decides to try and book a resort away for the weekend, with Hyun-chae and Da-bin together. She's obviously not happy with that given she has plans with Dukayan. More so though, she remains suspicious over what this means. When Seo-jin checks the news and hears about the typhoon, it brings back moments from the all-future where Seo-jin phoned Arai. He realizes it wasn't a delusion, but for now, is unsure exactly what this means. 10:33 p.m. arrives and Arai tries in vain to call Seo-jin. When she fails, she instead checks her phone and sees a message written by Dukayan telling her that she needs to team up with Dukayan and kill Tae-kyu. It's certainly an intriguing turn of events, and one that sees her head up and visit Gun-wook for his thoughts on this. Given the text message ended with him doing anything she wants, she believes someone else is intercepting those messages. Someone like Dukayan. Anyway, Arai meets Dukayan as requested in the message, but while they're talking outside, Seo-jin notices that the report about the collapse has been hurried and doesn't have many pages. Dukayan and Seo-jin, however, discuss their situation, but he refuses to believe what she's saying. She knows that something bad is going to happen to him whether he wants to admit it or not. October 15th sees Dukayan hire some help to find Song-ja and Arai. This eventually rolls round to the usual time of 10:34, as Arai sends a message to Seo-jin's phone, claiming that her mother may well be in a rural area, and asks for a number and address of the sauna Seo-jin, found her. As time continues to unravel, Dukayan remembers moments from their previous meeting together, but is obviously unsure of the exact address. Back on the 14th September, Song-ja phones Jin-ho and gives him some evidence to use against those after her. She tells him to send that evidence on to different media outlets and the prosecution, should she or Arai go missing anytime soon. She thanks him and decides to head back and see Arai. As she buys a ticket back to Seoul, Song-ja collapses in the bus terminal. A day passes, and 15th September sees the group decide to head out on their trip. Hyun-chae notices a difference with her husband, as he spends more time with Da-bin, and even takes a selfie with her. He cooks for them too. Hyun-chae is determined to follow through with her plan, but it's obvious that she's starting to have doubts. As the fateful time arrives, Arai phones Seo-jin again, but this time he knows that Dukayan is on the phone, and he answers her. When she mentions his name, he hurriedly hangs up and proceeds to delete the messages. Dukayan heads in to see Seo-jin and mentions how he can save Hyun-chae. As he looks to walk away, Seo-jin grabs his wrist and awakens from his comatose state. It's only a little though, and he's not complete lucid yet either. On the 16th September, Sung-ja is brought into hospital for observation, but they're unsure who she is. Arai meanwhile receives a call regarding her mother, and they race out to find her. Only, when she wakes up, Tikayu happens to be there watching over her. Time continues to jump back and forth pretty rapidly now, as we jump to the 17th October with Chairman Yu finding out that Seo-jin has recovered and will live. His choice of words that follow are very telling. How will we tell him about his family? And now the truth comes tumbling out. Director Yu has been working with Tikayu to find Song-ja's mother. Hein-chae found this out too from Tikayu, and handed over an envelope of money for his troubles. She visited Chairman Yu after realizing the $100,000 wired to Song-ja was actually done so by Yu. In September, he visits Song-ja in hospital and asks where her lifeline, recording, is. As everything starts to come unraveled, Seo-jin awakens from his coma in October. Episode 11 of Kairos begins with Chairman Yu confronting Song-ja in hospital and telling her she needs to keep her promise. She bites back, telling him she doesn't trust him. Their conversation is brief, but one that sees the chairman eventually walk away and tell Tikayu that Song-ja doesn't have long to live. When he leaves, Arai and the others show up and decide to take Song-ja home. She settles in, but still refuses to tell Arai exactly what's going on. Arai meanwhile, agrees to protect her mother and promises that at some point she'll tell her everything that's been going on. In the morning, Arai makes her some breakfast, but after hugging, she casually mentions Kim Yu-suk, which causes Sung-ja to immediately freeze up. As Arai mentions the accident, Sung-ja quickly changes the subject and tells her they should get her a new phone. In October, Kim finds out that Seo-jin had drugs in his system, and the car accelerated before it crashed. Apparently the brakes weren't even used when the car crashed. On the back of this, the officers contemplate whether Seo-jin's delusions could have caused him to commit suicide. Unbeknownst to them, Dukain happens to be listening to this whole conversation from out the door. Eventually he takes an opportune time to sneak in and steal Seo-jin's phone. Just as he does, Detective Park takes him aside and asks some questions about the accident. He doesn't get much information out of Dukain, but as he walks away, Seo-jin starts stirring and awakens. Unfortunately, he can't remember what happened in the accident. He does, however, remember that he didn't take the medicine, and there's no way he'd enact a suicide pact. Now the police, and Seo-jin, realize there's something more going on here, prompting the police to head off and try to work out who's responsible. Back in September, Dukain decides to meet with the residents who are against the town project. Only, that's easier said than done, when all the residents continue to hang up on him. Instead, Dukain heads there personally, but the man at home isn't very enthused to see him. Arai has more luck though, as she receives a call from the men involved asking her for help in their upcoming yearly brochure. While Arai is out, Hein-chae shows up at her house asking to speak to Sung-ja. She invites the woman in, but it's clear there's no love lost between them, especially when Sung-ja realizes the connection she has to Chairman Yu. Seo-jin meets the man responsible for bringing details about the illegal materials to light. He mentions Chairman Yu and how he bought shares cheaply after Banyang Construction's collapse. It certainly doesn't look good, and now he's starting to realize that the chairman is involved in all this. On the 18th October, Seo-jin receives a note from the nurse telling him to head out to the west parking lot. There, he gets in a car with Dukain and speeds away from the scene. Dukain tells our protagonist to stay at his for the time being, and admits that he knows about Arai and the calls back to September. Only, Seo-jin has amnesia, and he can't remember exactly what happened. Dukain tells him to contact Arai when he can, but it's clear Seo-jin is still dumbfounded and unsure what to do. As we cut back to December 2001, we see Song-ja handed an envelope full of evidence from Yu Seok, who tells her that he can't allow Tae-gil to die in vain, and wants to expose Chairman Yu. He tells her not to look inside for the time being, and promises to return soon. For now, he has proof to confirm Yu is the one responsible for the collapse. In September, Arai finds out about the meeting from the victims of the building collapse, and casually mentions that they met up a day before Yoon Seok passed away. Seo-jin eventually receives the report about the building collapse, and starts looking into it. As he does, Jin-ho receives a parcel at the hospital. At that same hospital, Arai shows to print out the patient files, but it turns out they've already been printed by Tikayu, who was obviously with the chairman. Now she starts to understand that Chairman Yu is linked to her mother. Back in October, Seo-jin finally remembers what happened. He was driving along at night with Hein-chae in the front. Tikayu was driving a truck on the opposite side of the road and almost ran him down. Seojin swerved to avoid him and fell off the side of the road. Heinche and Seojin survived the crash, but Tikayu injected both of them with a sedative. Irate, Seojin grabs Dukain and demands Tikayu show up. Instead, he's convinced to phone Arai back in the past. Finally they talk properly and Seojin admits that his memory is spotty. He needs her help, but she admits that it's useless given it won't change anything. After their call, Seojin heads up to meet Tikayu and runs him down with his car. Afterward, he grabs a rope and starts choking the man out until Tikayu mentions Chairman Yu is responsible for all this and was being blackmailed by Heinche. Heinche wasn't directly involved after all, and Yu had a recording of something incriminating. In September, 62 hours ago, Arai phoned Seojin who's only just recovered from his accident. It turns out he was pretending to have amnesia all this time. In fact, he actually did remember everything that took place. With this crucial puzzle piece compassed, all roads now lead to Chairman Yu as the one responsible for everything that's transpired thus far. Alas, the plot thickens as we see a final scene in October with Arai taken away on a stretcher. Episode 12 of Kairos begins in October as Arai's body is taken away, while Seojin overhears what happened. Sung-ja is in hospital, and they arrived home to find Arai dead. Seojin sees this and heads off to try and understand more. Meanwhile, police officers show up at hospital and break the news to Sung-ja that her daughter is dead. After seeing Arai's body, she collapses on the floor and is rushed back into hospital. Anyway, he waits for 10.34 and phones Arai, telling her she's going to die in a month's time and she needs to be prepared for that. However, just before she hangs up, Arai tells him about the incident with Chairman Yu and how he's involved. Back in September, Seojin learns that the building materials were changed. He's deep in work too, and unfortunately this causes him to neglect Ah-bin, who falls off her stool while trying to place stickers on the ceiling above her bed. She tries her best not to cry, but this scene is eerily similar to what we saw in the past, before she was taken away. After her phone call, Arai breaks the news to Sung-ja that in a month's time she's going to die. After, she heads in to see the victims and asks them about Banyang Constructions and their connection with Yujing. This brings the association into believing Yu is the one responsible. Meanwhile, Seojin heads in to see the chairman and realizes that one of the police officers is in collusion with him. This makes more sense now given Seojin's prying questions about the Tijing collapse that were never addressed. Unfortunately, this also rubs Yu up the wrong way too when Seojin brings his concerns to the boss. Yu simply brushes these aside, and when Seojin leaves, calls the police and tells them to investigate who gave the files to Seojin in the first place. While Jinho receives a call from someone which visibly spooks him, Heinche heads out with her friends, but her father shows up. She tells him to keep quiet, but obviously he's not going to do this, especially as more of Heinche's past is divulged. He even mentions how she wronged other people too. This completely rattles Heinche, phoning Tikayu and telling him to make passports so she can leave the country. Seojin takes Ah-bin to hospital after finding out she twisted her ankle. As she's bandaged up, he takes her back home while questioning why she didn't say anything before. Ah-bin sadly mentions how he and Heinche are always fighting, so she just kept quiet. After hearing this, he makes a promise to be there for her from now on. Seojin continues to investigate, working hard to find out the truth surrounding his father's suicide. The police found partial fingerprints there, and Seojin continues to talk to Detective Park about this. We're up to the 21st October now, as Seojin heads into the familiar convenience store and begins asking questions about Arai. After though, he receives a message from Gun-wook whom he talks to on the phone. It turns out Arai was suffocated, and there was a plastic bag over her head when he found her. Seojin eventually rings Arai from the past and tells her he's working with Gun-wook. He promises that things will work out okay, and as the call ends, Dukain rocks up at Arai's house and sees the police tape himself. Now he realizes that Arai has been killed. Seojin heads into hospital and speaks to Sung-ja, pleading with her to open up and admit everything that she knows about Yu and his despicable acts. In order to do that, he makes her phone Arai at 10:33 p.m., and it's an incredibly emotional minute for them both. This then ends with Arai telling her mother that they can change the future. Dukain meets up with a battered Tikayu and asks about Arai's death. He chuckles after Dukain asks if he was responsible, is this a yes or no, and eventually goes on to admit the painful truth that Heinche was only using him, she never cared about him. Seo-jin learns about the recording and how it incriminates Chairman Yu and Eugene Constructions over the collapse. Seo-jin's father definitely didn't die from suicide, and now it becomes clear that Yu had him killed. Park Ju-young happened to be working with Chairman Yu and killed Seo-jin's father over this evidence. Back in September, Gun-wook fixes up Arai's father's watch from her past, but tellingly, the two hands on the watch face happen to be stopped at 10:33 p.m. Could this be a sign? Anyway, as she looks at this, Seo-jin shows up at her place. It turns out before he was rescued from the collapse, Seo-jin was with her father in the wreckage. Now it becomes clear that these two are inexplicable. We begin episode 13 of Kairos on the 8th November 2001 as we see the various construction workers huddled around a fire before the inevitable collapse. As Seo-kin heads to the restroom, the guy called Lee hurries out the building, just before everything comes crashing down. The building tumbles and Seo-jin finds himself trapped, calling out in vain for help. Arai's father is impaled, and desperate to get back to his daughter, but unfortunately his injuries are too extreme. Just before he passes away, he urges Seo-jin to tell his daughter he loves her very much. Throwing a bottle of water over, he urges Seo-jin to survive. Determined not to give in, Seo-jin managed to be pulled to safety. Afterwards, he watches over 7-year-old Arai. Sitting with her on the swings, he implores the girl not to be like her father who had to eke his way through life. Seo-jin hands over the watch to her, which seems to hint why they're inexplicably linked. Back in the present, September, Arai phones Seo-jin and hands the phone over to himself, which causes a ripple effect through time as the two Seo-jins finally talk. He tells his earlier self to stop teaching Ayu, and the real mastermind behind everything, Chairman Yu. Seo-jin pleads with him to change things, as the call cuts out. Realizing he has the power to do just that, Seo-jin remains determined to put a stop to Chairman Yu and what's happened, attributing his survival to fate. First off though, they need evidence. This includes removing Tikayu too, but would inevitably mean putting Jin-ho in the firing line. That's something Arai is not willing to do, so she instead sacrifices herself. After phoning Arai and arranging a meeting, Tikayu forwards this information on to the chairman. When Gun-wook finds out what she's planning, he's not happy, and warns her to be careful. Realizing she's not going to budge on this, he instead remains determined to help her. On the 23rd October, Seo-jin brings Song-ja to safety, and admits that he's hired medical personnel to keep her safe. To avoid being traced, he switches his phone off, and tells her to be vigilant. While he leaves, Gun-wook reassures Song-ja, and tells her he'll make sure Arai returns. Only, someone happens to be watching outside. Jin-ho rings, after going into hiding, confirming that he has the package. This is something Song-ja wants back. Elsewhere, the police remain determined to try and find Seo-jin, who's also gone into hiding. Do-kyun, however, gets nowhere with the police, so he turns his attention to tracking down Song-ja instead. Jin-ho arrives to hand over the package, while Do-kyun struggles to find where Seo-jin and Song-ja are staying. Seo-jin does receive a call though, telling him his order has arrived. This sees him head out, but unfortunately Do-kyun happens to be watching from afar, and follows in hot pursuit. Upstairs, a masked man attacks Song-ja, and begins wheeling her up to the rooftop. When Seo-jin realizes what's happening, he scrambles up too, and sees this masked man looking to throw Song-ja over the top. A fight inevitably breaks out, but the assailant is too powerful, and throws him on the ground. Police arrive just in time to stop this plan from taking place. Unfortunately, Seo-jin is in the firing line as the main suspect. Because of this, Arai isn't able to contact Seo-jin in the future. Back in September, Seo-jin, Gun-wook and Arai all meet out in the open to discuss the case. Gun-wook is not sure they can trust him, but he rallies the troops with plans to install security cameras and incriminate Tikayu at a place of their choosing. The big day arrives and Arai's plan immediately goes awry, when she's forced to get in Tikayu's car and follow him. Realizing their plan may be going awry, Seo-jin tasks Gun-wook with following, while he brings the evidence he has, a video of Arai getting in Tikayu's car, to the police. Arai is inevitably brought before the chairman, wasting absolutely no time in bringing forward the subject of the construction site, and how Yu's responsible for the deaths of all those people. His reply is cagey, and to the point, eventually tasking Tikayu with taking her back home. And by back home, that means drugging her, and throwing the girl in the back of his car. Just as he does though, Gun-wook comes flying out the traps, and tries in vain to taser the man. Unfortunately he's easily overpowered and beaten down. Left in a bloody mess, Tikayu throws Arai's bag to Gun-wook on the ground and drives off. Seo-jin and the police race to the scene and see Gun-wook beaten down. The audio footage is gone, destroyed at T-Kayu's hands, and leaving Arai's life hanging in the balance. The police unfortunately lose track of the car as Seo-jin realizes he may know where T-Kayu is going. That place, of course, being the stretch of road he eventually hits his car in. This, as we see, is exactly where he's taken her as he sedates the girl and leaves her lying on her back on the road. Thankfully, Seo-jin's intuition sees the police make it just in time. T-Kayu does his best to get away from the police, but they continue to close in on him. Jumping forward to the 25th October, Seo-jin is questioned in the police station over his involvement in what happened to Song-ja at the hospital. Obviously he's not responsible, but the police believe that he is. However, Seo-jin remains quiet and pleads the fifth. T-Kayu heads into the police station and finds the cracked phone in Park Ho-young's evidence box. Only, all of this happens to be in vain as T-Kayu is captured in the past. Inevitably, the same dissolving scene takes place as time changes once again thanks to his arrest. Seo-jin awakens and finds himself back home too, with Hein-chae and Da-bin both alive and in their rooms. He's also no longer being chased by the police either. As he hugs them both, Do-kyun awakens to find himself in his bed too. Worryingly, he seems to have remembered what's happened. Do-kyun shows up at Seo-jin's door and embraces her warmly. As he tells her he's glad she didn't die, something doesn't sit well with Hein-chae as he utters these words. Seo-jin meanwhile, phones Arai's number, but Gun-wook picks up. It turns out Arai is still dead, meaning that whoever killed her most certainly is not T-Kayu. Although this prevented Da-bin and Hein-chae from being killed, it didn't stop Arai's murder. As we soon see from a flashback, Do-kyun is now in possession of Song-ja's evidence regarding the building collapse. Alongside the documents is a USB drive which features evidence of Chairman Yu being directly responsible. As Do-kyun watches this take place, the episode comes to a close. With time changed but Arai is still dead, episode 14 of Kairos begins with Gun-wook and Seo-jin scrambling to work out exactly what's happened to lead up to this point. With all eyes turning toward Chairman Yu, the real wild card here may well be Do-kyun. Back in September, Soo-young receives a call from Seo-jin from October. Given Seo-jin is outside in the waiting room, Soo-young finally starts to understand what's going on. In the morning, Seo-jin approaches Detective Park and asks about T-Kayu. He's close to being taken away and prosecuted given they have enough evidence. In October, Seo-jin starts getting ready. Dressed in a suit, he heads to work and calls Do-kyun in for his report. After signing, Seo-jin suggests they should stop working together. Finally the pair drop their facade as Seo-jin and Do-kyun talk about what they both know. It's an icy conversation, to say the least, as Do-kyun leaves his office and struggles to compose himself. Arai awakens from her ordeal in September and rings Seo-jin at the scheduled time. She finds out T-Kayu wasn't the one who killed her, meaning Arai's future is still set for her to die. After apologizing, Seo-jin remains determined to try and stop this from occurring. As he mentions Do-kyun and Hein-chae, the conversation suddenly ends. Arai heads back inside and speaks to Song-ja, who finally opens up and reveals what she knows. She hands over a phone number for Jin-ho and tells her that he's constantly on the move. Determined to try and find him, Soo-young teams up with Gun-wook and Arai to track him down. Soo-young reveals that she knows what's going on, asking them both to include her in on the plan. In the police station, T-Kayu is grilled by the police until his attorney shows up. When he hands over his business card, T-Kayu immediately perks up. In October, Seo-jin packs up his things and decides to leave his wife. He tells Hein-chae not to provoke Chairman Yu before parting ways. As he does, Do-kyun shows up and learns the truth about Hein-chae, the truth we've been waiting for most of the season. It turns out Hein-chae isn't her real name, isn't actually an alias. Her real name is Lee Yuna, and in the past, she used to be beaten badly by her father. After burning him alive, Hein-chae's father came back and threatened to expose everything. She didn't tell Do-kyun because she didn't think he'd love the woman she originally was. Do-kyun decides to take care of her father. Before he does though, he meets Seo-jin, and the two come to blows over what's best for Hein-chae. Given Seo-jin wants Song-ja's evidence, Do-kyun is willing to hand it over, but for a steep price to pay. He wants money and to leave with Hein-chae. Seo-jin agrees to think it over as the two look set to explode at any moment. Afterwards, Do-kyun rings Hein-chae's father and warns that if he goes near her again, he'll kill him. This only makes things worse though, as Hein-chae receives a call from her father, threatening to burn down her house if she doesn't hand over the money. He even claims to kill Dukain too. The fateful time arrives and Dukain immediately rings through to Arai and lets her know Dukain has the evidence needed to incriminate the chairman. While she continues on the hunt for this, Song-ja rings Jin-ho and tells him to hand over the documents to her daughter when she arrives. Jin-ho rings Arai to let her know what's happening, but unfortunately she's being watched from afar by a masked man. That man finds out where Jin-ho is hiding and arrives in the middle of the night, eventually critically injuring him. Arai is unaware of this as she rocks up in the neighborhood with Gunwook. Passing said masked man, Arai eventually finds Jin-ho at home in a rough way. In October, Hyun-chae hands over the money to her father, but her attempts to try and kill him are in vain as he figures out what she's up to. He smashes a glass across the back of her head and ties her up in the bathroom. With Hyun-chae indisposed for now, Seo-jin heads home and learns Hyun-chae is missing. While Dukain makes it there to try and save her, Seo-jin instead is preoccupied with Song-ja, who's just woken up in hospital. When he arrives, Song-ja tells Seo-jin that she's certain Detective Park was the one responsible for what happened to his father. It turns out Seo-jin's father was the one who suspected something afoul at the construction site. As we cut back to the day before the collapse, we see what? Mr. Lee arrived late in a truck armed with explosives. Unfortunately, the truth is this wasn't just an accident. This was a premeditated attack to kill those inside. Unfortunately, things take a turn for the worst after Jin-ho's attack. Thanks to the documents being taken, Song-ja and Jin-ho's meeting in October doesn't take place, and the future is rewritten again. As Arai rings Seo-jin, she receives details surrounding Detective Park. This, as it turns out, happens to be the same man who attacked and critically injured Jin-ho. Realizing that he's the real culprit thereafter, the future is set into motion as Dukain checks for his documents under the bed and of course, finds nothing given time has been altered. Hyun-chae awakens from her ordeal and manages to ring Dukain, texting him the address just in time. Hyun-chae's father returns home and looks set to really hurt her until Dukain races to the scene and beats the man down to the ground. He starts choking him out, but it's too much. Dukain is stabbed in the back. As the two wrestle in the house, Hyun-chae sneaks away and phones the police. When Seo-jin rocks up on the scene, he learns that both Dukain and Hyun-chae's father have died. With Jin-ho awake and able to move his fingers, Chairman Yu appears and tells him to hand over the documents, threatening Jae's life in the process. With everything looking bleak, a race against time looks set to ensue. We begin episode 15 of Kairos in the past, with Seo-jin recovering in hospital. Eugene Constructions promised to pay his tuition fees, as he finds out the truth about his father being killed. Back in the present-day October timeline, Chairman Yu stands over Jin-ho and tells him to wake up. He's sedated and clearly struggling, but when they leave, Seo-jin and Gun-wook show and tell him to hang in there as Jae is doing well. This gets Jin-ho's heart racing as doctors hurry in the room and tell them to leave as he needs his rest. Together, Seo-jin and Gun-wook drive off and agree to wait a bit longer before questioning Jin-ho again. Hyun-chae rings through and tells Seo-jin to come home. She promises to leave and tells him he should be with Da-bin for the time being. On his way home, Arai from the past rings and confirms that she couldn't find the package. Dukain is dead and Arai's death day is fast approaching. Time is very much against them. After the call, Seo-jin heads home and tells Hyun-chae she should stay for the night, given how much of a state she's in. Despite everything they've been through, Seo-jin places a cover on her while she sleeps on the floor. In September, Seo-jin and Arai exchange numbers and discuss Jin-ho's accident. Arai shows the picture of Park Ju-young to him, and confirms this is the person who tried to kill his father. It all rests on finding and stopping this man before it's too late. In hospital, Arai continues to keep an eye on Jae, who struggles to sleep. As we soon find out, the reason why is because she saw everything. She saw Park choking out her father and the plastic bag over his head. Arai comforts the girl as she confirms she'd be able to point him out again if he saw his face. This is just what they need as detectives lead Park away and begin questioning him down at the station. He tells them he lives alone and as no one can collaborate his story, it certainly doesn't look good for our characters. Then again, the star witness shows up and confirms that Park's the one responsible. On the back of this confession, the police have enough to arrest him. While they do, Arai and Seo-jin buckle up ready to head back home. On the way, Arai confirms that Dukain will die in a month's time. It's shocking news to him, but one that's immediately overshadowed by him receiving video footage of the charity event. Upon hearing the music, this brings back memories from the all-future where Dukain and Hyun-chae took Da-bin away. We've now moved forward a month on both timelines, with November and October serving as our two separate months. Anyway, Hyein-chae phones Seo-jin and suggests they head out on a trip on the 9th October. He refuses, especially after seeing the truth about what she was planning, and instead phones Arai, asking to meet. He tells her he's ready to face anything, but of course the truth is painful, especially after what he's witnessed. Still, for now Seo-jin heads back to Eugene Constructions and acts coldly toward Doo-kain when he drops off his work. Seo-jin suddenly asks about Hyein-chae and how much he knows about her. Seo-jin immediately tells Doo-kain to leave, but warns him about Hyein-chae's father. Doo-kain predictably leaves and speaks to Hyein-chae as flashes from the future come bleeding through. There, he sees Hyein-chae dead as these two timelines begin to overlap. Instead, Doo-kain turns his attention to Tae-kyu, showing up at prison, and asking who's giving him orders. He quickly tells him it's Chairman Yu, which subsequently sees Doo-kain back on the hunt to uncover the truth. Meanwhile, Arai heads off to find Jae's toy, which she seems to have misplaced and left at home. Eventually she finds it, but also uncovers a receipt for kangaroo storage too. Just as she leaves Jin-ho's place, Doo-kain turns the corner and watches them leave. When Arai heads there to retrieve the documents, it turns out Jin-ho already took them out 2 days earlier. Doo-kain shows up and immediately asks where the package is, heading in to confront the workers there. Eventually this spills over outside as Gun-wook and Arai confront him. Doo-kain admits the truth about Hyein-chae, and this sees him conflicted over what to do. In November, Tae-kyu is allowed to leave prison thanks to his connections. Only, in doing so he's given one final job to do. When the police find out he's been released, they're baffled by how this could have happened. Seo-jin receives a message come through over the storage locker and learns that the files there are missing. He also warns that Tae-kyu is obviously planning something and to be ready. With the old evidence long gone, Seo-jin tasks Arai with another plan, the only move they have left to use. This sees both October and November timelines moving forward simultaneously. In October, Seo-jin heads in and confronts Chairman Yu about his father's death. In November, Seo-jin does the exact same thing. Together they manage to convince Chairman Yu that they have the evidence, but will specify a time and date when to hand it over. In a touch of deja vu, both Seo-jin and his father happen to be sharing the same accusatory questions, as we cut back and forth between November and the past. Seo-jin suddenly tells him he doesn't have the files, but has now captured audio evidence of Chairman Yu incriminating himself. Seo-jin has been recording this entire time. Unfortunately, Yu's goons throw him off the top of the roof to his death. Back in October, Arai waits outside that very same building, while Seo-jin heads in to confront Chairman Yu. It looks like it's all up to our October timeline now to change the future. Episode 16 of Kairos begins with us hearing exactly what happened on that fateful phone call between Arai and Seo-jin. It turns out Seo-jin was on the phone to Arai for the final minute of his life before he plunged to his death. The audio recording he has was sent back to Arai in October before he died. Thankfully, his death was not in vain. This does, however, put both Arai and Seo-jin from October in a tricky position, as they need to leverage this evidence at an opportune moment. Arai and Seo-jin sit together and go over the text messaging timings before heading to work like normal. Arai finds herself becoming increasingly paranoid when she realizes that they've approached the day she's supposed to die. Have they done enough to prevent this? Arai is understandably jittery and even more uneasy when she tries to ring Seo-jin and finds out his phone is switched off. Gun-wook approaches though and lends her a sympathetic ear, telling Arai he believes they'll get through this and win. Doo-kain makes his decision, showing up at Hyein-chae's father's place and stabbing him in the chest. As the two fight, their skirmish leads to time repeating itself as both Doo-kain and Hyein-chae's father lie dead in a pool of their own blood. The police get involved and start investigating the case, ringing Seo-jin and letting him know what's happened. As news spreads onto the news, both Arai and Hyein-chae see what's happened, but obviously time has changed given Doo-kain is not supposed to be dead on this date. Hyein-chae scrambles over to Doo-kain's house where passports happen to be sitting on the table for her and Da-bin. A note accompanies it simply reading "Leave this place." Sung-ja is cleared to leave the hospital, but before that, Seo-jin shows up to speak to her. Time is starting to fall apart now as she receives flashes from the future where Arai has died. She immediately rings Arai, and the pair realize they're running out of time and need to make their move now. Chairman Yu is wise to what's happening around him, and has been using Tae-kyu as his lackey to find the true location of the documents. With Seo-jin's bluff called, Yu receives a call from Song-ja who claims to have the package. This throws a big spanner in the works as he didn't expect this. She too's obviously bluffing, but Yu falls for the bait and agrees to meet that night at the construction site. It all rests on this final meeting as Arai waits outside, while Seo-jin heads inside to speak to Yu. Ironically, Yu cracks the same joke about the stairwell as he did in last episode's November timeline. This time though, instead of being thrown over the edge, police show up at the building and prevent this from happening. Seo-jin is forced to thwart T-Kayu's threat as he tries to stab him. Thankfully Detective Choi stops this just at the right moment as T-Kayu frustratingly slips through their fingers. With him gone for now, Chairman Yu is taken down to the police station. His voice recording from November holds up as evidence now, and because of this, he's indicted and thrown into jail. Yu immediately gets hold of his lawyer's phone and rings T-Kayu, tasking him with killing Jin-ho. All of this now results in a mad scramble to try and wake Jin-ho up to stop this nightmare before it's too late. Eventually Jin-ho opens his eyes and begins whispering. Before they can decipher what he's saying, T-Kayu shows up brandishing a knife determined to kill off the evidence. Only, T-Kayu is tasered and subsequently arrested. It turns out the files were with Jai-Su's ashes all this time. Park never actually took the files from Jin-ho's house after all. Yu's court case goes ahead and Jin-ho rocks up in court to hand over the original project files from Seo-jin's father. With Yu arrested and held on a life imprisonment charge, this nightmare finally looks to be over. Jin-ho's involvement in all this, especially the kidnapping of Da-bin, sees him apologize to Seo-jin before turning himself in to the police. Hyeon-chae is taken down to the station too, arrested on her kidnapping attempt. Seo-jin visits her and decides to take custody of Da-bin, handing over divorce papers for her to sign too. With everything she had slipping through her fingers, Hyeon-chae's release from prison dissolves any happiness like ash, as she stumbles through the rain aimlessly by herself. Meanwhile, the rest of the characters meet and enjoy their time together. Soo-young receives a call from someone asking to give them their phone back. Uh-oh, not again. Anyway, the team decide to start living every minute together, rather than focusing on that fateful 10:33 p.m. time. With everything looking up, and all our characters finally on the right track, the finale bows out with one final look at a phone screen reading 10:33. During the epilogue though, a phone on a table suddenly. Kairos bows out its finale with a surprisingly solid and satisfying conclusion that rounds out all the big plot points and character arcs in a really compelling way. Chairman Yu finally gets his comeuppance, while Hyeon-chae's greed sees her receive some poetic justice as she's left all alone with no one else to turn to. One of the big themes this season has been redemption. This is especially evident here as we see Jin-ho face up to his part in the crimes and Gun-wook even repaying Arai, courtesy of the lottery numbers. All these little moments help to build up Kairos as one of the more solid Korean dramas this year. In fact, this is one of those thrilling underrated gems that people will look back on in years to come, and wonder quite how more people weren't aware of it. Sci-fi dramas can sometimes live or die by its ending, hello, memories of the Alhambra and Alice, but here everything just slots together in the most satisfying way possible. In fact, Kairos is easily one of the best dramas in 2020. In a year that's brought us so many heavy hitters, it's a shame that Kairos finds itself so far down the list. Still, this has been an enthralling watch from start to finish and well worth checking out.